Fox News wrote, top Harris aide hypes radical activists at American 9/11 while plotting future for Dems. A top aide on vice president's failed presidential campaign recently called for more cultural voices in the vocal anti-American, anti-Israel twist star Hassan Piker. Harris' former deputy campaign manager, Rob Flarity, said during a recent interview the Democrats are losing control of culture. It's ironic because I think this is, once again, the right side of mainstream media also doing the same shit that like they routinely criticize the Democrats for doing. And it virtually goes nowhere. Okay. The pearl clutching over this when Trump literally went on some of the worst people's shows. Yeah, exactly. So apparently Semaphore interviewed Kamala Harris's digital chief on Democrats losing hold of the culture. And in this, he dropped my name. Is this who you meant when you said the Harris campaign wanted you at the DNC? This is the deputy campaign manager. I didn't know that the deputy campaign manager was HasanAbi head. I did not know that. I wish he would have listened to my advice a little bit. But anyway, okay, the campaign needed to introduce Harris quickly to people who aren't obsessed with politics. Sports is perhaps America's last remaining monoculture, and Flarity and the Harris team decided to book her on sports shows and podcasts. But one by one, the biggest personalities in shows politely turned them down. Sports and culture have sort of merged together, and as sports and culture become more publicly and sort of natively associated with this Trump conservative set of values, it got more complicated for athletes to come out in favor of us. It got more complicated for sports personalities to take us on their shows because they didn't want to do politics. That's not to say Steph Curry and Steve Kerr and LeBron James and all of them coming out wasn't impactful or important, he said. It was more impactful because it had gotten so much harder. But certainly the culture has been associated with heavy sports watching, has become associated with right-wing culture in a way that makes it hard for us to reach people. First of all, L. Second of all, skill issue. But last but not least, I wouldn't necessarily say that sports watching across the board is just like dominated by right-wing sentiment, even though virtually everything online is incredibly right-wing. I don't think that that's the case. I just don't. Stephen Curry's burner. Thank you for the 5 gifted subs. Maybe you should gift the biggest gift of all, not friendship, but instead socialize housing in your neighborhood. That's what you should be doing instead of being an additional hurdle to homeless shelters being built in your neighborhood because you think it's going to ruin the culture. The campaign's failure to completely crack the sports sphere was, to Flarity, ominous and a part of a larger trend in which some influencers who had felt comfortable engaging with the Biden White House demurred when asked to help Harris make her case to her followers. When it's not cool to talk about politics, he said, you're kind of afraid of the audience. You don't even have to talk about politics. I think the environment for politics is changing a little bit as well. Like political communication is changing as well, where you can't just be a political personality who is like uptight and constantly on note. You can't have a Pete Buttigieg style person, right? You have to be more of a real person. If you want to live in the post-Trump universe, you have to kind of play ball. You have to be a personable human being. It's a very weird thing to demand from politicians. I guess back in the day, when information was significantly more limited and confined to network television, you could do what is known as retail politics, right? You can have these setups where you basically faked human interaction. But digital retail politics is very different. Digital retail politics is what is in demand now. And you have to learn the language of online to be able to do that successfully. And you have to be personable. Instead of going to the Iowa, corn shucking festival or whatever and eating a hot dog, you actually have to do this shit. You have to go on the podcast circuit. And in order to do that, you can't be a bot and you can't be an NPC. And unfortunately for Kamala Harris, like there were definitely podcasts where she shined. Like whenever she went on, I don't know, like a HBCU adjacent podcast, I think she did a pretty decent job, much better than like Hillary Clinton, for example. Having said that, however, there's like a massive marketplace where she did not have this opportunity at all. She was not able to have this opportunity at all because like she's kind of a bot, she's kind of an NPC. She's like too scared to have a personality. That could be because she is a black woman in politics and you don't have the leeway of a white man in politics, a rich white man in politics. I'm sure that that's part of it, right? But I think that it's not even about having charisma. It's more so just being honest. It's not like Bernie Sanders is a tremendously charismatic individual, okay? He's not. He's a fucking old ass nerd. But Bernie Sanders is earnest. And that's the reason why when he does those like Theo Von appearances and whatnot, they blow up. And people like it. The age of technocratic neoliberalism is over. It just doesn't sell. I don't even know if it ever really sold, but since it was the only game in town, a lot of people were like, all right, whatever, I'll vote for this. Look at the way that Timothy Chalamet is talking about Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, we had Bernie Sanders on and he was saying that He said Pete Seeger was one of his favorite musicians.
Scoot McNairy could play Bernie Sanders in a biopic.
Oh, he could.
Right?
Yeah.
Totally could. Bernie hasn't aged.
Nah, Bernie still looks the same. He's the best, dude.
He's looked the same in the last... Yeah. He's like a real folk hero.
It's a great point.
Yeah, Bernie is...
He is a folk hero.
Yeah, he's folk.
Yeah, no wonder he loves Pete Seeger. Of course he does. So, but that's it. Like, look, this is the way that like normal people respond to Bernie Sanders. He isn't like the most charismatic person on the planet. Far from it. But he's honest. He's earnest. He cares about these things that like, you know, will genuinely improve people's lives, and he advocates for them viciously, right? And I think that is what matters. I think that is important. And I don't think a Kamala Harris type person is going to be able to do that. I think Tim Walz could do that. Tim Walz has a little bit of that dog in him. But for that to happen, the Democratic Party also has to change its messaging. The Democratic Party has to change its establishment Democrat, third way neoliberalism as a policy win or lose attitude. Flarity was also paying close attention to how the race was being run on the Republican side. Donald Trump was leaning into new podcasts, and his opponents were tapping a large network of right-leaning and conservative personalities to amplify their messages. The reality of the matter is, he didn't just tap in to right-wing ecosystem. He went in to as many outlets as possible that would have him. That's the thing that people don't comprehend. Like, I wouldn't say Theo Vaughn is right wing. I don't think he is. Joe Rogan is, but he's unique, and Joe Rogan wasn't right wing for the longest part. Democrats, Harris 2028 presidential run. Yeah, no, this is bullshit. I don't believe that this will happen. They're writing these articles specifically because Kamala's going to sell a book eventually, and that's it. That's it. I think that the only reason why they're saying that is because like she's going to write a book and they want to sell it. No one's going to read your book if you're not going to run again. Yeah, it's bullshit. I don't think she's going to run again. All right. Anyway, then he acknowledged that the Republican Party had done a better job building up its alternative digital media ecosystem with podcasters, YouTube streamers, and friendly pundits. But he argued that the then Biden campaign would overcome those obstacles by better navigating the personalized internet, which by which sophisticated algorithms feed America's highly specific information tailored to their taste and online behavior. The campaign knew from the beginning that the race was going to come down to voters who do not pay attention to politics or mainstream news and instead get their information from people on YouTube, their friends, Instagram stories, or links or memes dropped into a group chat. This firstly meant a shift in paid advertising from the previous campaign. Instead of just blanketing the airwaves of battleground states, the campaign also invested heavily in ads on YouTube, recognized the rapid growth in streaming. That's where the campaign's data showed many Harris key voters were spending their time. More importantly, this meant building out a strategy focused more on podcast appearances and interviews with influencers than on traditional media. But they failed on that. Tim Walz is not as truthful as JD Vance. Just letting you know, yeah, I think you're on crack cocaine if you think that. JD Vance is a literal rat. The people do not respond positively to JD Vance. The people respond positively to Tim Walz, okay? One is a real American from the heartland. The other one is a fucking carpetbagger who basically sold out his own people in an effort to elevate his presence by liberals for years, only to turn around and then brown nose the Republican right, which he once called correctly a bunch of fascists. He changed his entire worldview at the age of 35, acted like he got groomed by mainstream media to think that Trump was a Nazi. That's not a real person at all. JD Vance is Republican Pete Buttigieg. La rata. Flarity isn't dismissive of television and other legacy media. One of the most important moments of the campaign was her interview with Brett Baer. That was a huge fundraising moment. It was a huge social moment. When Trump did the McDonald's thing, it was smart because it was a thing that obviously drove television coverage, but it also drove social media engagement too. And those things often happen in tandem, but they don't always. And so it was the sweet spot. It drove traditional coverage and non-traditional media. I don't think TV is dead. It's still probably the most important thing, but it's the literal TV and what's on it that matters. As the campaign wore on, though, Flarity said he realized the failure to gain traction in certain corners of the media reflected a deeper problem, one that wasn't solved when Harris replaced Biden on the ticket. The Harris campaign, representing what many voters saw as embodiment of the status quo, was running contrary to not just ideological distrust of establishment figures, but to media trends. The media successes of 2024 were independent, non-traditional online personalities who themselves were avatars of the rewards of going up against the establishment. The reason folks are seeking alternative sources of media and are turning away from political news is because they don't trust their institutions. They don't trust elites. They don't trust the media. They don't trust all this stuff. So the party of elites and institutions is going to have a hard time selling to people in those places, Flarity said. I want to point out something here, because a lot of people will say, Hasan, the only appeal that you have is because you're anti-establishment, right? And to them, I say, you are not paying attention, because as much as I rail against mainstream media, I still rely on mainstream journalism. As much as I rail against mainstream media, I still interview New York Times journalists. I interview CNN journalists. I interview and give interviews to mainstream media, because I understand that there is an importance within these institutions, okay? As much as I rail against establishment Democrats, I had Lena Khan, the commissioner of the Federal Trade Commission. That is as institutional as it gets. As much as I rail against the establishment Democrats, I still champion the NLRB. I still champion the many wins even of the Biden administration, especially as it pertains to the regulatory agencies. I understand the importance of these agencies. That's the difference. I am not a contrarian for the sake of being a contrarian. I do not actually yell about the establishment Democrats in an effort to gain clout, okay? And I think that's a silly way to approach it. And I think that's a silly way to operate in general. I've never been an advocate for destroying institutions just because they work in a corrupt manner. That's the difference between someone like myself and someone like RFK Jr. Abolish corruption rather than destroy and deregulate this regulatory body. I understand that the government must exist. I understand that that it can exist. It's not as simple as go to Joe Rogan and talk about how great democracy is and the importance of preserving the independence of the DOJ or whatever. You've got to speak their language. And I think there are plenty of cultural touch points. I mean, Joe Rogan was at least recently for Medicare for All. Theo Vaughn is really against money in politics in the way that pharma has flooded our communities with opioids. Those are all things that the Democrats have something to say on. But as long as we seem like the party of the system, the people who are anti-system and looking for anti-systemic media, we're going to have a hard time connecting with them. Now, nowhere was this more clear than within the manosphere of podcasts and content creators like Rogan and Vaughn. To them, Trump had become less toxic and more based, and he rewarded his supporters with access. Flarity said the Trump campaign successfully used new media to reshape culture, while Democrats found that the mass media institutions that had long largely supported them were weaker than these new cultural drivers. It's more than just young men. It's a broader ecosystem, he said. Democrats have historically had these really close relationships with institutional media, institutional culture, Hollywood, and the traditional press. There's this entire cultural ecosystem that Trump campaign did a really good job cultivating over a long period of time. Flarity also acknowledged that Elon Musk's purchase of X, Twitter, played a major role in the campaign, further tilting the scale of online culture and information towards Trump. Its importance was twofold. One, it was where you reach elites and high information people, but two, it was also the kind of place where politics could sort of careen into culture. It was a really important central node, even if it wasn't the farthest reaching platform, he said. It was obvious that center-left and left content was being throttled compared to right content. But while the campaign came to believe it was fighting an uphill battle against culture, moving in the opposite direction, it also made some strategic errors of its own, based on faulty assumptions. Flarity said that one place he understated the Trump campaign was a central part of the former president's digital strategy. The Harris campaign thought that Trump's team decision to continue talking to the manosphere meant he would simply be reaching the same audiences over and over again. But the incredible frequency of those appearances helped build the former president's credibility with that audience, which seeped out. To Flarity, part of this starts with putting real effort into building the left and center-left's own independent media ecosystem, divorced from the nonpartisan media that has historically satiated Democrats' appetite. Flarity said one silver lining of the election was that many hardcore Democratic partisans have begun to waver from their satisfaction with legacy media. They're never going to not trust the New York Times, and they're never going to distrust the Washington Post, Flarity said. But I think that in a Trump era, you start to see frustrations with mainstream media come to a boil. And I think there will be smart people who try to fill the gap, more individuals who create content on the left and center-left messaging. Flarity said that Democrats need to invest boosting independent partisan friends online, as well as content creators and media figures who haven't been explicitly political but could reflect liberal and progressive values to counter the surging online pro-Trump right. Flarity does not understand a fundamental part of this. And although he brings me up in literally the next moment after this is Kamala Harris's digital chief, okay? A fairly high level person in Kamala Harris's campaign. And yet I think, and I don't know if he's watching this right now, I don't know if he can hear me speak on this matter. I have spoken on this extensively to CNN and numerous other outlets at this point, but I think this fundamentally misses a very important point, okay? Trump did not boost and offer money to these center-right podcasts. Trump was able to go there, meet them where they're at, and communicate with them in a way that was somewhat apolitical, okay? Part of that is because there are a lot of, I guess, social issues that they aligned on to a certain degree, but more importantly, it's because Trump is a famous TV personality and he's carried that attitude throughout the first 4 years. And certainly to this day, he still carries that attitude. That's it. There is also a lot more leeway, creative liberties that you can take on when you are a right winger. Like you can just kind of get away with saying whatever the fuck you want. You can get away with saying it being, you can get away with being a dumbass. But Trump's charisma certainly carried him across the finish line. It wasn't that like he had fantastic policies or whatever, but he could tell a story real well. And that goes a long way. He was able to, in spite of being a billionaire born with a silver spoon, a real estate tycoon with numerous failed businesses under his belt, he was able to present himself as a real guy, as opposed to all of these other fake, phony guys, the Democrats, and even Republicans that stood against him. Anyway, So here's what Flarity says. We need a whole thriving ecosystem. It's not just Pod Save America, though I think we should have more of them. It's not just Hasan Piker. We should have more Hasan Pikers. It's also the cultural creators, the folks who are one rung out, who influence the nonpartisan audience. Okay, I don't disagree with this. Those things all need to happen together. The problem is, you can't inorganically develop this. I guess you can pump money into it a little bit to give it more prominence, to give it more respect, to give it more legitimacy. But you can't inorganically create the same, you can't do a Nelk Boys, but for the left, because the Nelk Boys were not created by the Republican Party, okay? You can look at Daily Wire. Daily Wire is a great example. Daily Wire is a direct political operative. Daily Wire is not funded by the Republican Party. Daily Wire is funded by those who fund the Republican Party. Do you understand? Daily Wire is not directly funded by the Republican Party, but the same billionaires that fund the Republican Party also fund the Daily Wire. But that's a direct political operative, right? That's a very obviously partisan ideological project. What we're talking about here isn't the Daily Wires of the world. What we're talking about isn't necessarily even the Joe Rogans of the world, but the Theo Vons of the world, the Nelk Boys of the world, or the Barstools of the world that sometimes find themselves in the throes of right-wing politics. The issue here is these people, just like the broader voting population, have found themselves cast aside by the Democratic Party. And the reason why they found themselves cast aside by the Democratic Party is because the Democratic Party keeps saying, we have no space for you. We have no space for you. You're bad. You're wrong. We're not going to give you any policies that are good. We're going to do everything in our power to say, if you want that stuff, you're lame, you're bad. Like Bill Burr is a great example of a person who is right there. He's right there. He's aligned, just like myself. He's closest to me in, I would say, political perspectives without being a political operative, right? He's right there. But just like Kamala Harris can't come on my stream, she's not going to go on Bill Burr's podcast either. Making a leftist Joe Rogan doesn't change the fact that 86-year-old Nancy Pelosi, while recovering from a free hip replacement, campaigned for a 70-year-old with throat cancer for oversight committee rather than a 35-year-old. The geriatric ghouls in Congress refuse to step down. Exactly. Those things all need to happen together, he said. And the reality is, it's not going to be big media organizations. It's going to be a network and a constellation of individual personalities, because that's how people get their information now. Flarity says he believes the ecosystem need to grow in order to sort of stimulate demand. There is some truth to this. As people run away from cable, the center-left starts to distrust mainstream media, and as the mainstream media outlets become more reliant on their mostly center-left subscribers, all this is going to kind of happen in tandem. I don't even think you would be what they want, even if they did support those things, because you care about foreign policy and internationalism, and they will never back down from imperialism. I think that's a big part of it as well. But there used to be a space within the Democratic Party for people who actually were openly anti-imperialist, okay? That is the problem. That is completely gone from the coalitions. It's completely abolished. There is not a single Democrat that is known for having an anti-imperialist slant, okay? At most, you get the likes of Bernie Sanders, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and every now and then AOC, okay? There are no Gravels anymore. And it's not just Gravel either. The problem is you could still make it work. You could still be someone who is critical of the Democratic Party's, administration, the administrative function when it comes to American empire, and yet still advocate for them. Yeah, the Barbara Lees of the world. Exactly. You could do that. That's fine. There was a space in that big tent, but I think the Democrats have openly cast aside and have reduced their ranks or destroyed that wing of the party, even though this is yet another divergence within the Democratic Party's operations and the Democratic Party's base of support. Not even just the, diehard Dems, but specifically just Americans in general. Like, Americans broadly do not see themselves as pro-war. Americans are fearful, and yes, they are oblivious to American empire, but when asked directly about their opinions, they're like, I don't want war. I don't like war. I'm not a fan of war. Donald Trump now, this is the second time Donald Trump cast himself as a anti-war guy. Now, we know that that's not the truth. But he still ran as an anti-war guy, okay? And he still presented himself as that. In the weeks since Trump's reelection, savvy and clueless media observers alike have chalked up Harris's problems in the media to small decisions like a failure to appear on Rogan's podcast. A moment that Flarity acknowledged was a missed opportunity. This misunderstands a simple aspect of the media strategy that gleaned from speaking with both the Trump campaign and the Harris campaign about their approaches to new media. Ultimately, their media strategies weren't particularly different. Both campaigns leaned hard into alternative new media. I don't think they did. I don't think Flarity leaned as hard into alternative media as Trump did. Like, the maximum alternative media they went on was call her daddy. And ultimately, it doesn't matter. You can appear on every fucking platform, but if you are not uniquely telegenic in the way that Trump is, then you have to make up for it with good policies that address the genuine issues that Americans are experiencing.